We got the mic? All right, sweet. Yeah, that's the first. I know. It's the first time I've had walk-up music. That's pretty cool. I know. That was for the Lord, not for me. That was for the Lord. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm back up here, and yes, we are missing a number of people today. Today is starting a week of camp, and so I know we're missing, at bare minimum, we're missing 5 people that are volunteering at camp, and then there's a number of other families who are headed up there and all that, so we're missing a number of people for that. But amen, we're here to worship the Lord, and I tell you, it's been, I missed last week, and it feels like so much longer. My wife and I, we took our family to visit my family in Hawaii, which was a great trip. And not to cue the world's tiniest violin and all that, but it was the most tiring trip I've ever been on. And I am including the service trip to Haiti, where I built a road and where I met my wife. It was so tiring with the time change, with the kids dealing with the time change, with my brother's family. Just God bless him, he started scheduling a number of activities to the point where we had to cut him off and say, stop scheduling stuff. We're just there to just be there, be with family. We don't need to do all these extra activities. That we're already together. And he understood, and at the end of the week, he was like, yeah, that was probably a little too much. And so again, it was a great trip. It was a time for my kids to connect with their cousins for a long period of time, for them to see a side of the family that they had not met before, and so it was a really great time. It's been 9 years since we visited Hawaii, and the first time for the kids, obviously. So it was a great time, but it was a very, very tiring time, and still kind of processing through that, still kind of adjusting, still feeling the effects of it even now. But it is refreshing to be back amongst our church family. It is refreshing to see our familiar faces that we missed. Kai was asking about you guys during the trip, so he's excited to see everybody again. And so we are continuing in our sermon series of falling, why we fall. That's a kind of flinch bomb motto at this point. Why do we fall down? To get back up. I feel like I've heard that for so many years now. And for me, when I think of falling down, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in California. And so when I think of falling down, I think of rollerblading. I'm taking a little bit of a risk here. On the off chance there are people that don't know what rollerblades are, they're like roller skates, but instead of the wheels being set up like a car, they're all in a single file line. And I assume it's designed to be faster, but I've seen some very fast, just roller skaters. And so that was a big thing for us in Southern California, is we were my brother and I, we rollerbladed all over the place. It was an activity and it was a mode of transportation. And no one really showed us how to do it. We saw it on TV and we saw our friends doing it, so we wanted to do it. And so we got our rollerblades, and we had one set of protective gear between the two of us. I don't remember how we usually divided it up, but there was one set of knee pads, there was one set of wrist guards that have that little bump so when you fall on the ground, there was one set of elbow pads and one helmet. Different time, right? Different time. But that was what we used to get to our friend's house. Occasionally we used bikes, but we liked roller hockey, so that was what we used. And so there were a lot of times where we'd be skating and we'd be trying to do little ramps, and we never really got to doing the X Games style stunts or anything like that, but we try to go up driveways and jump down sets of stairs and everything, and we would fall down. And so as we would fall down, you would think through initially be oh, that hurt, how do we not tell mom that we got hurt? But as we wanted to avoid that, one, just to avoid getting hurt, and then two, to not look uncool by falling down. How do we remain looking cool by staying up? How do we need to adjust our technique? What did we do wrong that first time that we could avoid? And to try to avoid doing that mistakes again. So the whole point of falling is that we learn. I'm sorry, I got a real dry mouth. So it's weird to say that the goal of falling is to learn, but if we don't learn from those falls, then the falling really is pointless. All it does is hurt or make us look foolish. And so it is really important as we go through this series, thinking about like, yes, why do we fall? What can we learn from this? And today we're going to be looking at Peter in Matthew chapter 16. And Peter's an interesting character because I feel like whenever we're talking about, particularly in the New Testament, we're talking about someone who is making a mistake. I feel like we run to Peter quite often. There's a concept, if I can go kind of inverse really quick, there's a concept in fiction known as an archetype, like a character type, known as the Mary Sue. And what the Mary Sue is a character that just does everything right and hasn't really done anything to earn it. They're just introduced as good at everything. They can be attractive and talented. They can do something for the first time and just be excellent at it, just be like the ace. It's criticized as just a lazy writing. You just gave this character all the abilities to do this thing. You know, you could maybe view Superman that way. One recent example has been Rey from the new Star Wars trilogy. And people just accuse them of not having enough character. And we look at Peter, and I feel like he's kind of like the anti-Mary Sue. Like that is not, I mean, I don't know how attractive he was, but everything else, he is, we kind of make fun of it to a point. Like the man was a disciple and cut someone's ear off. Like, that's not something you do accidentally. Like, I don't know what he was planning on doing. Because here's the thing, Peter was a fisherman, right? He wasn't a soldier. So it wasn't with skill that he just sliced off a man's ear. Like, I don't know if he was actually trying to kill the guy and just was so bad at it he just cut it. Like, I don't know what he was doing. But Peter is not someone we hold up, that you would hold up as like a paradigm of, you know, as perfection or anything like that. But we go to him as an example because he messes up, and then what does he do? He learns. Not necessarily right away, as not to be too spoilery, but I believe next week Ryan is going to be talking about Peter denying Jesus and multiple times. And so Peter doesn't necessarily learn right away, but the reason why we talk about him so much is because he does eventually learn from his mistakes. And I think we appreciate that because we ourselves make mistakes. I'm going to assume that nobody in here is perfect, and so that we make mistakes. And seeing someone like Peter, who makes so many mistakes, is so close to Jesus, and still makes mistakes over and over, and still can learn and grow and become this respected individual whose example we really learn from. So in Matthew chapter 16, and this starts off really well for Peter. Starting in verse 13, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Peter's got to be feeling pretty good right now. I don't know. You know, he sees the other disciples giving answers, like, oh, like some say John the Baptist, Elijah. You know, there's all these answers, and it's almost like the disciples are almost avoiding the question. Well, these people say this is who you are. They're not answering for themselves, and so Jesus says directly, "What about you? Who do you say I am?" And so Peter answers, saying, "You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God." And Jesus acknowledges that, and you know, I don't know if Peter is necessarily like a teacher's pet or something like that, but you can just imagine him like as people are getting these responses, like, "I know the answer. I know the answer. I can, you know, that, man, I should have asked you beforehand. I don't know which Harry Potter it is where Hermione's just like got her hand raised up, just waiting to be answered, because she knows she, not the last one. But he knows the answer. He's excited to give that answer, and he gets built up after that. He's called the rock, like a keystone of the church. But then very quickly, in Matthew 16, Jesus is talking about what the plans are for him, and talks about how he's going to die, what's going to happen to him. And Peter does not like this. He doesn't agree with it. And in Matthew chapter 16, verse 22 to 23, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." And before we do verse 23, the audacity of Peter. Like, it's one thing to sort of like just kind of be emotional in the moment. Just like if I say something and someone in the crowd's like, "No, like that's crazy, what are you thinking?" But he would essentially like come up out of the crowd and be like, no, that's not going to happen. Like, no, you're wrong. The audacity of Peter to come up and pull Jesus aside and rebuke him, not just offer like, I don't know if that's true. Like, are you sure? Did you double check? But rebukes him on it. Says, "Never, Lord, this shall never happen to you." And Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." What a crushing blow to Peter's ego this must have been. Because again, you can sort of understand an emotional reaction. Like, this is not just a teacher, like this is his friend. And so there is an emotional aspect of like disbelief, right, in the 5 stages of grief. So there is certainly some leeway for him to have feelings. We talk a lot about how like there's nothing wrong with having any kind of feeling, but it's what you do with that feeling that's where you start going into sin or something else. But he has his emotional reaction, and then he has his internal, I guess, emotional reaction, and then he has like that physical reaction where he responds and pulls Jesus aside. And this is within Peter's character. This is not really surprising. Again, this is what we kind of know him for, is he has these emotional outbursts. And it can be very easy to dwell on these mistakes that we make. No one likes to make mistakes. Even when we empirically know that we're going to learn from them, are we excited to make mistakes? Don't we think like, is there another way I can learn this? Can I just learn this through reading it? Can I learn this is there another way I can learn? Like, why do I have to make a mistake to learn? And yes, there are obviously other ways to learn. We didn't learn everything we know by making mistakes. But we also don't know everything. It's impossible to know everything. And so sometimes we make a move, we do something, and we realize that was the wrong thing to do. And I think that's where Peter is. He responds with what he thinks is right. And isn't that the thing, like, we sometimes, sure, will intentionally do the wrong thing, and that's on us and that's our sin, but sometimes we think we're doing the right thing. Sometimes we're like, this is what I need to do. This is what needs to be done in this situation. And whether it's lack of context of the situation, whether it's our own personal lack of knowledge and information, we can make the wrong move. We can make the wrong choice. We can say the wrong thing. And in that moment, once we realize the mistake has been made, we have an opportunity to let it either continue to spiral. We deny that we make a mistake. We get defensive. Say, well, I didn't know. Like, okay, it's okay you didn't know. We can have these negative responses. We can get mad at someone else for our mistake. We can blame. Or we can take a step back, and regardless of how other people react, right? Because that can sometimes fuel how we respond, is how people react to us. But regardless of how people react to us, when we realize that we have made a mistake, what can we do differently next time? And let's be honest, we sometimes aren't able to do that in the moment, right? Because we're still feeling what we feel. But at some point, it could be a minute later, it could be days later, but at some point, we're able to kind of be settled down and look back at those situations with a little more rationality with a little more peace of mind, and really kind of analyze what could I have done differently? And it may not actively be what's the lesson to learn in this situation, because that I don't know. My mind doesn't necessarily go to what can I learn, but in that sense of like what could I have done differently? How did that happen? We analyze and we look at what we can do differently and what we can learn. Peter, he continues to make mistakes early in the New Testament, early in the Gospels, but he grows. And he gets to the point, and I don't think he ever gets to the point where he doesn't need correction. There's even an example in Galatians where he was sort of keeping himself separate from like the Gentile, like Galatians, and Paul had to correct him on that. And so it's not like Peter all of a sudden became a perfect person, but I do think we hear less about Peter's mistakes because he has grown, because we really get to see a lot of his growth as he works through his feelings and his reaction and his mistakes, and we get to see him grow as a disciple and as a person. And I think we need to realize that when Jesus spoke to Peter early in chapter 16, when he says those things about him, blessed are you, son of Simon, son of Jonah, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, he didn't make a mistake. He didn't say those things and then realize, nope, Peter's terrible, get behind me, Satan. Both things can be true. Peter can be flawed. Peter can have an amazing future. Likewise for us, we are imperfect. We can be terrible, but there is a hope and a future for us that God has seen, every one of us. And it's all going to be different. And we don't want to get into the mistake of comparing our future to other people's future, our past to other people's past. We have our own paths that we walk. But we need to see that wherever we're at now, and hopefully we're in a place where we're seeing a lot of the good that God has done for us, and we're seeing a lot of the positive in our lives. But I think all of us can focus on at least some negatives, and certainly some of us are focusing on the majority of the negatives. And it's not that the negatives aren't there, but I think it's also important to realize that the negatives aren't permanent. Who you are right now isn't who you're going to be. I think about what my younger self would think of me now. What my 13-year-old self would think of me. My 13-year-old self was, a typical teenager. I think my 13-year-old self would probably initially would initially focus on the negative. Like, oh, you got old. Like, oh, you got heavy. Like, Like, what are you doing in Pennsylvania? Why are we on the East Coast? Why did we leave California? So there'd be some negative focus. But I'm confident that the 13-year-old would be like, start noticing some superficial things. Like, hey, you finally got those braces off. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Like, how are you talking in front of people? You hate talking in front of people. You don't like people. Like, how did you go? You went to Haiti. Like, speaking as a 13-year-old, I don't even know where Haiti is. Like, how did you do that? Like, oh, you married a babe. Good for you. Good for you. And that's exactly how I would have said it too. Babe was our lexicon back in the day. So, he would see, and again, some of those are very shallow things. I don't know how much 13-year-old me would appreciate some of the deep, like, I'm following God now. What? But even 23-year-old me was a disciple, has at least some more maturity, you'd like to think, 10 years on. Even 23-year-old me would be surprised that I was public speaking, because 23-year-old me was 2 years removed from taking a public speaking class and then quitting it like 3 weeks in. And so even 23-year-old me would look and be like, wow, like, you're doing something with your life. 23-year-old me, so I went through an early quarter-life crisis, because you figure you have the midlife crisis, you got a quarter-life crisis. I was 23 when I went through my quarter-life crisis and was like, I'm 23, I've done nothing in my life. My life is 23 years old. My life is wasted and I'm not gonna do anything. Resigned to never getting, because getting married was a big thing to me at 23. Being resigned, like, oh, it's not gonna happen. I'm 23, my life is over. Even that 23-year-old would look and like, wow, like, you were part of a church planting. Like, I can't believe you took that chance. Like, you moved to New Orleans to do disaster relief. Like, you are helping people know God. Like, you're still doing it. I don't know how some of you guys felt when you first started coming to church and first became a disciple, but I remember when I first started coming to church, became a disciple in my campus ministry, I would look at people who were disciples 3 years and be like, that's amazing. How do you do this for 3 years? You must be the most spiritual person at 3 years of going to church every Sunday, twice if you include midweek. That's amazing. How do you do that? And here I am, I should have done the math, but 22 odd years in, and I still feel like I still feel like there's so much to learn. Like, I don't know how I looked at someone who had done this for 3 years and thought like they were the pinnacle, and here I am, still continuing to try to grow. But that's the thing, right? We are continuing to grow. We are still working towards someone that we're gonna be. We're working towards that person that God sees us to be. So however we see ourselves, and it's important to have an honest look at ourselves. Like, we don't want to not see our flaws because we want to be able to grow and improve on them. We don't want to just ignore them. But we don't want to get so discouraged by them that we don't see how we can improve. And I think it's very important to take an honest look at your life and see where you were. As a person, as a disciple, see who you were 5 years ago. See who you were 10 years ago. See who you were, beyond. And I think it's very easy, when we think that way, I think it can be very easy to start having kind of like those regrets and what would you have done differently. And I think about that sometimes too, like, man, like, I'd love to do some stuff different in high school. I'd love to do some stuff different in college and this and that. But I also have to admit that so many of those decisions, even the ones that I regret, led me to where I am today because I learned. I feel weird calling myself a responsible person, but I think I am. I think I'm fairly responsible. Part of learning that was responsibility was because I was incredibly irresponsible when I was in my early days of college. I think I've told the story before, I don't remember when, that my parents took care of everything in college. They took care of my tuition, they took care of my housing, they took care of my gas, they took care of my food, they took care of everything. They even, on top of that, they were spending money. And for their efforts, I did basically nothing in college. If you were to add up all my credits, I believe I'm still a freshman. For 4 years, I wasted their money. And at the end of it, we sat down like, okay, like this can't happen anymore. And obviously, that's not a good thing. That's not a good example of how to be, of gratitude or anything, of discipline. And I would like to think there's another way I could have learned it, but I think by seeing myself waste someone else's money, I realized the importance of being responsible and being trusted with stuff like that. And from then on, when it was decided, like, okay, you're not gonna go to school anymore, you have to pay your own way, I became very disciplined with my money. I became very responsible just kind of in general with my time, with the decisions I was making, and that helped form who I am today. And Without that, I don't know what lessons I would have learned, but that's the thing, right? Like, we have these experiences, and we can either learn from them and grow as people, or we can continue to make the same mistakes. We can just be the same person who we were and keep falling and falling and falling and not learning. But what happens when you fall? You can hurt yourself. If you're lucky, you just fall and you kind of look silly. But you can fall and you can get hurt. You can skin the knee. You can break something. Like, it can be a bad thing. And so if we're lucky, our falls are just skin knees, just scabs. But we have those falls where we can break something. And we want to avoid those. We want to avoid those big falls. And it's through learning from those little falls that we're able to do that. But also keep in mind that with those big falls, there's still something that we can learn. There's still lessons that we need to be taught. And so as we go through our lives, we think about, it's less about trying to avoid the mistakes. And I don't want to be unwise and just say, don't give a second thought to anything you do. But more importantly than not making mistakes, we know we're going to make mistakes. That's built into who we are, is knowing that we're going to make mistakes. Be prepared to learn what you can. Like, don't get caught off guard. Don't be like, something bad happened. Whoops, who knew that was happening? But be prepared to learn. Be prepared to see who you can become from that mistake. We're not the sum of our mistakes. That's not what God sees when he looks at us. He is aware of them. God is fully aware of our mistakes and who we are and our flaws. But God sees who we can be, who we can grow into. And that's what we want to keep our eye on. That's what we want to become. That concludes the sermon. We're going to have worship come up here for a final song. Thank you very much.